8 o'clock, and we can go ahead and call this committee appointments to order. Good morning, colleagues. For the record, Commissioner Robbins is on via phone as he is on military service, and we have a memo outlining that, which is allowable under our Open Meetings Act.
So per open, sorry, my mic's here now. Per Open Meetings Act, Commissioner Robbins, can you explain, you don't have to say where you are, but just that you are remote and for military duty?
Yep, yeah, correct. Per the Open Meetings Act, military members on active orders are able to be accommodated to join virtually, so that's what I will be doing today for my meetings.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Well, we have a few action items, colleagues, and then a discussion of the board vacancy list. I think we have a couple of, at least one resignation from planning that we'll highlight when we get to option 3. But given that Commissioner Robbins is remote and given that we do have a fairly full day today, I think if we do our 2 items and then a review of who has resigned, I don't have much more on the vacancy list, and unless colleagues do as well, I think we can have a fairly short meeting here. Okay? So the first item for our consideration is a resolution rescinding the appointment of Marcus Hargrave from the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Support. Moved and supported. This is not a typical resolution that we would see, but Daniel and I talked at the last meeting. Mr. Hargrave was appointed to this board, and while we do allow for individuals outside of the city limits, that spot on this board is already taken, and we're unable to move that person to another board. So we do need to remove Mr. Hargrave off the board with the hopes that, one, continue to think that he would be an excellent addition to this board or any other boards. He had listed some others that may be a better fit in terms of residency. And I'm going to turn it to Daniel and say all of that is correct, what I just said. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. We do thank Mr. Hargrave for his willingness to serve, and I do apologize for the oversight of not recognizing the residency requirement on this board. But I have spoken to Mr. Hargrave and explained the situation, and he has graciously understood this, and I have passed his personal information form to the liaison of the other board he is interested in.
Okay, great. Can you confirm what that board is?
The Community Relations Commission.
Community Relations.
It is full at the moment, but...
Okay. Thank you. Yes, we just did add 3 individuals. What I will say is we sometimes think we have a full board, and then before you know it, we don't have a full board, and I think there might be some other opportunities. So thank you for noting that. Appreciate his grace as we work through this error on our part, and just need, now I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that carries. Thank you so much. Next is a resolution to appoint the following 10 members to the Seating Justice Grand Rapids Board of Directors, including Brandy Kimbrell, Yvonne Jackson, Eugene Suing, Erica Van Dyke, Willie Lonnie Patterson III, Tawana Monique Azell, Kirk Eklund, Shalelle Horton, Juan Rosario, and Stacy Stout. Do I have a motion?
Support.
It's been moved and supported, and we've, Ms. Atkins, our interim director of equity and engagement, is up here to tell us more. As you all know, Ms. Atkins has been working very closely in the formation of this board, most notably the bylaws, and is now in this new role and is going to share a little bit with us.
Thank you, Commissioner Isasi. Good morning to the board. We are so excited to present this slate of the 10 members before you to the board. Right now, we had a working board of 3 members. 1 will be rolling off, and we're very excited to welcome them. This is another stage in our efforts to stand up the Seating Justice Grand Rapids nonprofit. So your approval today will really help us push this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this is not we've had a lot of not typical things on our agenda. Just a reminder, the mayor also serves on this body. So does, and now Stacy's name moved forward because she's no longer here, and we think that would, the current board thinks that would be a good fit. I think so as well. I think all members represent a different perspective. But the mayor, Ms. Claren, our CFO,
Former Commissioner
Jones, Erica Gonzalez, who is the managing director at The Source, has a lot of experience working with those that have been impacted by the war on drugs. That's the board right now, but this puts us in a good spot to be able to move this work forward.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Any questions, colleagues? For myself, I was part of the last board meeting as the appointments chair, just to kind of make that connection to that body and to this body.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about the background of some of these folks. I recognize some of the names. I see some folks in philanthropy, Mrs. Stout, obviously, but are there other kind of sectors or interests that are represented amongst these names?
Yes.
You don't have to go one by one.
Yeah,
but
that
just
is,
making sure.
yeah, that is a great question. One of the things, without naming certain individuals, but there are, I would say, a handful of people who represent individuals who actually were part of the criminal justice system as it related to cannabis possession. So that was an important marker for us. One individual is in the workforce development area. So again, we talk about employment, and I mean, employment was probably, given that the amount of money is still undetermined, I think what we put in 220K at this point, or maybe 150, I can't remember. We just did it last meeting, but we'll probably focus on employment, certainly other opportunities for, small business ownership, but workforce development was one of them. Individuals that had experience in community organizing, Mr. Patterson from Link, I'll just call him out, sort of connecting into community, being in different neighborhoods, individuals who are small business owners, individuals with design thinking experience. I think that's probably it. And we can certainly share the resumes of individuals as well if you're interested in further look.
Okay. And is the board full after?
Yes.
The board is full. Yep. So I think our bylaws call for 11 to 13. And some folks that we're on right now will probably roll off, because we sort of put a group together of people who could be what I'll call more of the worker bees to get the body in formation. Maybe not as much interest in kind of staying on for how do we flow this money out and what are some of the other considerations. So we had a smaller group to start with. And then also knowing that probably some people may have to, just like we see every week, like somebody may have to go off and things like that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And,
thanks.
I'm realizing that in the last 7 months since I've been on commission, we haven't received a briefing on this work, and so I'll make a note, wondering when that might come before us as well.
Sure.
So, but
Yeah.
all my questions related to the appointments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry, I may not have been full transparency. I was working on something else, but just want to make sure. So this, full transparency.
Go ahead.
So this board now becomes a separate entity, so they will now pick their
Yes.
reappointments, and they'll work on their bylaws and their staggering terms and all those things.
Yes. So because this was a new standalone nonprofit, you are correct. I'm just saying, I think you were part of it. There was other things going on. But the reality is, yes, this will be an independent body, but when we wrote, I think the language, when we had that ordinance come before us, it noted that the city commission would set the initial board.
Yes, we did want to use the city appointments policy for transparency for the community.
Yes. We like to do things for the first time here, so a couple first timers. Thank you for the questions, good reminders. Commissioner Robbins, do you have any questions?
I am also, thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you so much. City Clerk, can you go to our petitions and communications? I think we have one resignation that we've noted for this evening. I think it's,
It's Mr. Salim Al-Shatel from the Planning Commission.
yes, thank you. Wow. It's right on cue. Thank you so much. That we had a lot of petitions and communications, so thank you. But yes, so Mr. Chattel is on our Planning Commission. I think he's served for maybe a few years now. My understanding is that he's moving out of the area and will no longer be able to serve on this body. So we thank Mr. Chattel for his service. He was at the Joint Planning Commission meeting that we had the other day. So we will be looking for an individual for that body, knowing that that body has a lot of work ahead of it, as we do as well as it relates to zoning. Daniel, could you forward any I don't know what I was going to say, but any PIFs related to the Planning Commission? And again, in this body, we certainly want to make sure we stay close to Ms. Turkelson to make sure we can move that appointment forward.
Absolutely.
All right. So that will be a priority for this body. I don't have any other general updates as it relates to any of the openings. Colleagues, do you have any openings you'd like to highlight or to talk about? Okay. All right. Well, hearing none and seeing none, we can go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 8:11. Thank you. All right. You could hear everything.
All right, good morning, everyone. We will call the fiscal committee to order here at 8:30. First item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the West Michigan Regional Medical Consortium for federal fiscal year 2022 DHS grant program.
Support.
Moved and supported. Our Fire Chief Brad Brown. Good morning.
Good
sir.
morning. Just filling in for the emergency manager. She's at the Homeland Security Conference in Chicago. According to her, this is something that we generally just sign every year. It allows us the opportunity to pursue grant funds through a third party. So it's pretty straightforward.
Very good. Colleagues, questions?
No.
All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Next item, resolution approving a payment to the Kent County Treasurer for oblique aerial imagery in the amount of $10,603.97.
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported. Our assessor, Ms. Jasper, good morning.
Good morning. This is for aerial photography that Kent County contracts to do every 3 years. And the local communities partner with Kent County, so this is our portion of the payment. A neat thing is that this payment is less than the last one that we did 3 years ago by a little bit, so that's kind of nice that the price is going down. But this really saves a lot of time and money when we do our annual review of properties every year. So this is just a partnership with Kent County.
Very good. Colleagues, questions?
I have one.
Yes.
I noticed in the brief, it talked about we used to do these services and then the county took it over. I'm curious if there's a significant dollar amount difference from when we operated this imagery technology versus when the county does and we just share in.
Yeah, it's quite a while ago that the city would contract on its own and fly over the city.
Sorry,
But,
Paul,
since-
is your microphone on?
Is that better?
There you go.
Okay. When the county started contracting to do the flyovers for the entire county, it became more cost efficient for us to partner with them. And we would do, I think they would do 5 years and we would do in between, and they brought it down to 3 years so that we would not have to contract on our own.
Thank you.
All right, no further questions. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3 is a resolution approving a personal services contract with Carol Gornowich for recording secretary services for various city boards and commissions not to exceed $25,000.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Ms. Claren? if you want
Sure, I
to
can
this.
pitch in. This individual has been, helpful when we have a staff shortage, need that service. So it's been cost effective without having to add another position.
Yep, I think you all met her the other day when she was at our meeting. All right, colleagues, any questions? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 4, resolution authorizing lease agreements with T-Mobile to utilize Cambridge, Knapp, and Leonard Street water tanks for communication purposes.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Dernberg, good morning.
Morning, Commissioners. This essentially is renewing leases with T-Mobile for those 3 tanks that were mentioned for the cell contracts. The current contracts are in their final term, and basically we're getting another 25, 30-year extension out of it.
All right, questions? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Item 5, resolution authorizing budget substitution of $100,000 for Coopersville and Marne Railway Bridge replacement.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Bergman, our engineer. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is to support a utility improvement project in Walker that they're doing as part of this bridge replacement being constructed over Bristol Avenue. The budget substitution is specifically for the sanitary sewer portion of the work, but they are doing sanitary and water. This moves the necessary funding into place, and per our financing agreement that was previously approved by Commission, that cost will be recouped through the City of Walker's rate structure. Planning to begin the project in April of 2024.
Very good. Colleagues? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6, ordinance amending Section 1 of the Budget Ordinance for 2023-15 for fiscal year 2024, Amendment Number 1.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Ms. Claren?
Okay, this is our first budget amendment of the new fiscal year, so Happy New Year, everyone. And our first item is putting the budget in place. As we discussed during budget adoption, we did qualify for use of that ARPA money the city received. We're going to use $7 million of that towards the new ERP project. So just moving those funds from the general fund into, we have a separate fund, the Financial Management Systems Fund. We utilized this during our last ERP implementation. We thought this would be a good way to break those costs apart and have the transactions happen over there. Number two, we just talked about the Bristol Avenue utility project. This is $315,000 from the Water Operations Fund and putting it into the Water Replacement Fund using fund balance there. Number three is the 2023 FEMA AFG Fire Grant. This is related to, I believe, the exercise equipment and the wellness screenings. This is a total of $84,828. That includes the match of about $7,700. Number four, this is the 2020 COPS hiring program grant. We initially received this grant, got an extension because our staffing wasn't as such, where usually you have to be fully staffed and then you can deploy this grant. In the meantime, since we received the extension, we also got permission to start using this grant this year as we do staff up. So from a cash flow perspective, we're able to get that grant reimbursement within this fiscal year, which will, money we don't have to expend ourselves. So as we staff up, we're able to utilize this grant sooner. So putting the appropriation in place there in the Police Grants Fund. Number five is the Police Records Specialist. This is adding one position to the police department to address this work. We've had a large backlog of responses to FOIA, particularly in the reports and video. This is a collaborative effort with the legal department, and it was decided the position probably works the best over in the police department. So we're adding a position there. And then number six, the Emergency Federal Law Enforcement Assistance Grant. This is for $2 million in the Police Grants Fund. And then finally, with our contingency balance, we started out the year with $1.5 million. We are using a little bit of that related to the Police Records Specialist. So that takes our balance down to just over $1.4 million.
Very good. Colleagues, questions? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 7 is our bid list resolution for July 25, 2023. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Ms. Clarence, any items of note on here you'd like to point out?
No, unless there's any questions, me or the departments are here to answer.
Colleagues, questions?
I didn't have a question.
All right, very good. With that, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. With that, we'll turn to our warrant report for June 28th, 2023 through July 11, 2023. Mr. Comptroller.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the period referenced there, the city released cash payments totaling $18.4 million. This amount includes $5.2 million for our employee payroll expense and just over $233,000 for income tax warrants. In terms of quantity, we issued 1,242 income tax refunds and 1,287 checks and electronic payments. And as always, the details of those payments greater than $20,000 are included on the following pages.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for the Comptroller? All right, hearing none, that report will be received and filed. And final item on the agenda this morning is our Treasurer's Report for the period June 23, 2023 through July 12, 2023. Mr. Treasurer.
Good morning, Commissioners. With our report today, we wanted to point out a different facet of the economy. One is consumer savings. And so right now, the estimate is that Fitch estimates there's $900 billion in consumer savings in June, but the spend down is roughly $73 billion a month. So doing simple math, we're talking about next summer that the consumer savings will be exhausted or back to normalized levels. But this is another concept where there's too much money in the system chasing after too few resources and services. So it's not only at the personal level, but we also know it's at the corporate level as they brace for recession and hard economic times. They're saving money and stockpiling money. And we look at that with municipal as well, our municipal governments, because we still have our ARPA money in-house and we're sitting on cash as well. We can't spend it fast enough because there's just not enough people to do that work, not enough items to purchase. And so as the Fed rate keeps coming down, it's coming down slowly. It's at 4% now. However, core inflation is still sitting at 5.4%. They strip out food and energy from the CPI to get to core inflation. So that's still not coming down fast enough. It's just it's a slow move right now. Tomorrow, there's over almost a 99% expectation that the Fed will raise the rate again by 0.25%, and that will bring it to 5.25 to 5.5%. It's still far away. That CPI number at 4% is still double what the Fed's target typically has been at 2%. So they still have a way to go to get back to what their idea of a normalized economy is. When we're looking at some other things, we look at the fact that our investment portfolio is now at $536 million. It's earning 2.64%, so that's ticking up as we're able to take investments that were earning lower than what market is right now. We're able to reinvest at higher rates. And then what you'll see, not so much in this report here because it was before property taxes were issued to the public, the residents, is you'll see the influx of property tax dollars. We are ahead of schedule right now. I think that our community has always valued the services of the city and paid their taxes. They pay them on time. We turn over less than 2% of our property tax base is turned over to the county as delinquent. So a lot of people are going to have all these taxes paid. Usually by August 15th, we have the significant portion paid. At our next meeting, I'll be able to provide you an update of how much has been paid through the end of July. But our community really has that civic responsibility and understands that you've got that person who's paying at 5:16 in the morning was our first payment that came in through Pay It. So, we've had them before where they've come in at 12:04 a.m. And our community understands civic responsibility and the importance of our government. And I can't wait to report what that collection rate is because I'm sure that it's well above where we were last year. So that's our report for today.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for the treasurer? All right, with that, the report will be received and filed. And that will conclude our fiscal committee at 8:42. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. It's approximately 9:15. We are preparing to start community development meeting. Committee starts now. On our agenda, we have 5 resolutions, and our first resolution is a resolution authorizing assessor to spread nuisance charges for certain outstanding accounts receivable, roll number 8782, totaling $661,099.22. Good morning, Ms. Cahill.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is our...
Whoa.
Yep.
So move. Support.
Sorry
I'm
about
always
that.
anxious to get going, you know.
It's like... So this is our semi-annual request for the assessor to begin the next special assessment process for nuisance rule 8782. As you indicated, it's for $361,099.22. That's comprised of 1,326 invoices with due dates for the period between January 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2023. This assessment roll request is about 26% lower than the most recent nuisance roll we processed and equates to about 7% of the total invoices for that same period of time. The property owners have been notified. They've received both an invoice and a past due notification, but this process will also allow for additional notification and a formal appeal process for those charges. And if you have any questions?
Ms. Cahill, remind me, how many property owners were there? Can you know offhand?
I don't have the list of how many owners because there'll be multiple invoices to the same owner, so it's definitely less than the 1,300 invoices. We do get a lot of property management companies, and we find that you'll see repeat names on this list from time to time. And I find that sometimes that's just their way of financing, is to put it on the next time it goes, if they don't get paid, it goes on their tax bill and it just gets roped into their escrow, their mortgage, and it gives them a way to finance the charges. Property management companies, sometimes that's just their way of waiting for it to get to their tax bill to pay it that way. Otherwise, like I said, we do, the owners can contact the development center about these. They do work with the property owners if they get notified, if there's any leeway to give an extension of time or something like that before. So as long as they work with the development center, they definitely will, we obviously have to enforce the ordinances and state law, but they work with the property owners as much as they can.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to throw out again, I remember when this came up some months ago, and I questioned if someone owns the property, but you all send a notice to the property, but they don't live at the property, then they may not know, because there was somebody's name on there that I recognize, and I reached out to them, and what happens is people that's living there, they just throw that away. And they didn't know, and when I told them, they hurried up and went and paid it. And I see another name on here that I recognize, and I'm like, I'm wondering.
Yeah,
actually knows.
We do update the records. These are for parcel-based records. So the invoices do go to the property owner. We update them at least monthly to the assessment records. Sometimes ownership records are a little slow to update through the assessor if there's been a recent change in ownership. It has to trickle through with the Register of Deeds at the county to the city. If they register with the assessor with their property transfer affidavit, then it gets updated a little quicker that way. But we do send the notices to the owner of record on these.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All in favor? Aye. Commissioner, you're in favor?
I said aye.
I didn't hear you.
Aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Number 2, resolution rescinding a portion of a resolution and approving a construction agreement for Sedona Hills.
So moved.
Support.
Good morning,
Bergman,
Commissioners.
how are you doing this morning?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Thank you. So this is for a single-family home development in Grand Rapids Township, consisting of 12 parcels that require water service. The city previously approved the construction agreement earlier this year, back on February 21st. However, since that approval, ownership has transferred to another developer, now Bradford Hills LLC. So asking for your approval of this resolution, which would rescind that previous construction agreement with Halland Homes and approve the new agreement with Bradford Hills.
Colleague, any questions?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Resolution number 3, a resolution awarding a contract with Allied Mechanical Services for replacement of north header flow meter at Market Avenue Pump Station in the amount of $353,480, with a total amount not to exceed $464,324.
So move.
Support. Mr. Bergman.
So this project will replace a significant flow meter on a substantial force main that heads out of the Market Avenue pump station. That pump station services a regional area, a substantial portion of the north and west sewer service area. We did receive 2 bids on June 27th, and Allied Mechanical provided the low bid of $353,480, which was just over the engineer's estimate of $330,000. So requesting your approval of this award to Allied with that not to exceed amount of $464,324 coming from the sewer fund.
Any questions, colleague? All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. Resolution number 4, resolution approving an easement to Consumers Energy at the 500 Bridge Street Northwest Fire Station for $1 for emergency generator replacement.
So moved.
Support.
We're currently working to replace emergency generators at our fire stations. This is being done under a project that was awarded last June and includes a grant that the fire department was able to secure through FEMA. The generator that's being installed at this specific location requires additional electric service work to be completed by consumers. The easement will allow for a utility pole and associated down guy to be installed on the Winter Street side of the property. So asking for your approval of this conveyance to consumers of this easement for nominal consideration of $1.
Man, I wish all of them cost $1. That's great. Colleague, any questions? All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. Resolution number 5, resolution approving an encroachment agreement with Corewell Health in Monroe Avenue Northwest for the Center for Transformation and Innovation.
So moved.
Support. Mr. Bergman.
So yes, this encroachment relates to the CTI campus currently under construction by Corewell Health. It specifically allows for the construction of a planter box to be installed along the east right-of-way line of Monroe Avenue at where Fairbanks was previously vacated. The planter box will encroach approximately 6 feet into the Monroe Avenue right-of-way. All subsequent maintenance will be the responsibility of the developer, and the encroachment agreement just spells out the roles and responsibilities associated with this license. So requesting your approval.
Colleague, any questions?
So this is not, you said it's going to take up 6 more feet.
Right.
So is into the street?
Into the right-of-way. So the street is, within the right-of-way, but then there's room beyond the street, so like the sidewalk curb area. And so this will be kind of in that kind of sidewalk zone, but it allows them to construct this in there at our permission, at the city's permission. But if there's ever a need to remove it for some purpose, that also
So it's
allows
not taking up like any extra sidewalk or any more street, and then there's no bike lanes over there. Right?
Are there bike lanes on North Monroe in that area? Yes, yeah, but it's not impacting those.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. At this point in time, it is approximately 9:23. The Community Development Committee is adjourned.
Is it always 1 minute behind?
Nope,
That's what I thought too, but we just need Commissioner Moody.
he's absent.
Oh, that's right, he is absent. Thank you for reminding me.
Yep. Commissioner Robbins is not joining us.
Okay, all right. So we will get started with Committee of the Whole. So a little unusual, Commissioners, that we don't have any voting items before us today. So we do have two presentations that we'd like to start off with, and then we have a couple important briefings. We do have an executive session to go into directly afterwards for pending litigation. So I think I'll go ahead and call for that. And are we going to Law Library?
601.
601. So I think I'll call that, get that out of the way. It's a voice vote, so can I get a motion for after the briefings to go directly into executive session for pending litigation?
Support.
All right, moved and supported, and this is a voice vote. I'll start down here with Commissioner Perdue.
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
And I am a yes. Thank you, Commissioners. All right, with that, we're going to take a few minutes to recognize some of our wonderful city staff and departments. So the first one is a presentation recognizing the awards to the water resource recovery and some of our staff who work in the environmental services and water departments. What I'd like to do is turn this over to Mr. James Hurt to tell us about these awards, invite those staff members forward so that we can all personally thank them for their work. I know I was given an opportunity to thank them at the recent conference that we had in town, but I'm not sure that anyone else was able to participate in the conference when we had it here in Grand Rapids. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners, City Manager, City Attorney, City Clerk. I wanted to come forward and highlight some of our employees. The Mayor indicated our employees do great work, and they've been recognized by the Michigan Michigan Water Environment Association, and thank you, Mayor, for coming to their conference and providing opening remarks. They celebrated their 98th year as an organization, and they highlighted a number of our employees, and I really wanted to just bring that forward to you and let you know some of the good work that our people are doing and what they're being recognized for. So the first one is Jennifer Smarecki. Jennifer is the Collection System Asset Supervisor. She received the Collection Systems Professional of the Year Award. This is given to a worthy individual who, working on a day-to-day basis in collections, displayed remarkable dedication to an employer, which is the City of Grand Rapids, and to the MWEA, excelled professionally and publicly promoted the water environment profession. I don't know if Jennifer's here or not. I didn't see her come in, but I'd like to give her a round of applause. The next one I'd like to recognize is Mr. Jared Grabinski. He's the Assistant Environmental Services Manager. Jared received the Doris Van Dam Operations Professional of the Year Award. This is given to an individual who displayed outstanding service to an employer and to the MWEA, contributing to the professional growth of coworkers, consistently generated good quality facility effluent, and publicly promoted the profession of the water resource recovery facility operator. I know Jared is here. I'd like to recognize Jared. Next, I'd like to recognize Hillary Karen. Hillary is the Water Education and Programs Coordinator. She works within the Water Department but provides service to all the utilities. She received the Educational Professional of the Year Award. This is given to an individual for their efforts in promoting activities and professionalism in water resource education. I'd like to recognize Hillary for her efforts. I know she could not be with us either. The last person I'd like to recognize is Charles Schroeder, better known as Chuck. Chuck was the Assistant Environmental Services Manager who recently retired, and he's not with us today, but I did want to recognize him for all his efforts. He received the Public Utility Management Professional of the Year Award. This is given to a worthy individual who has demonstrated outstanding dedication to an employer and to the community, has excelled in public utilities management, and has publicly promoted the water environment profession. Many thanks to Chuck. The final award, I'd like to recognize that the Water Resource Recovery Facility was presented with a Sustainable Energy Award. This honor is given to a resource recovery facility that has taken the initiative to start and maintain an ongoing program of continuous improvement to reduce the energy operating costs within the facility. And we recognize that, and I want to make sure that you're all aware of that. So congratulations to the WRF and all the employees there.
Yeah, congratulations.
I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge two other awards that we received from the Michigan chapter of the American Public Works Association. We were granted Project of the Year awards for two of our projects last year, one being the Market Avenue sanitary sewer relocation, as well as the, what I would call Monroe pedestrian crossing in front of City Hall. Those two projects were recognized as Project of the Year, and we received an award for that too. So congratulations to the city. I want to make sure that you're aware of that.
Yeah, thank you, James. I think people want to clap again.
Okay, let's clap again.
James, did you want to get a picture?
I'd love
Or
to
should
get a
we wait
picture.
until after the proclamation?
Let's do the next one if we could.
After the next one?
Yes.
Okay. So, Commissioners, I'm going to come down here and give a proclamation and say a few more words, and then we'll call up some of our city staff to join us. Is Wayne here?
Wayne's here.
Oh, there you are, way in the back, Wayne. So I'm going to have Wayne join us because in addition to being able to highlight our water department and our city staff, we are celebrating 150 years of the Grand Rapids water system. So I'm glad to have Wayne Jernberg up here. Many of us know him. And you know, when I think about our water system, so often, one, it's an essential service, obviously, that we provide. We do it in partnership with a number of surrounding areas, but it's a lot of the work that goes unseen. And it's something that we all should be really proud of. So it looks like Wayne's calling up other people. So come on up, and then I want to read this proclamation. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Wayne. These are really important services that we provide to our residents every single day. And the fact that we continue to be recognized, not just statewide, but nationally, really is a testament to the incredible work that happens. As I said, that often goes unseen by so many people in our community. So I'll read this proclamation and then we'll get a group picture. Whereas on July 20th, 1873, Grand Rapids residents voted to establish the very first city-owned water system. Since its inception on that day, 150 years ago, the Grand Rapids water system has been a pillar of our community, providing vital water services and contributing to the overall well-being of our community. Whereas the water system has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to providing high-quality drinking water while ensuring the availability of clean and safe drinking water for generations. The water system has been a pioneer in implementing innovative technologies and sustainable practices, aiming to protect and preserve our valuable water resources, and actively fosters public awareness about the importance of preserving these water resources, thus empowering citizens to be stewards of this precious asset. Whereas the water system's dedicated employees have shown outstanding professionalism, integrity, and expertise in their daily work and maintaining the highest standards of customer service. They have also forged strong partnerships with local organizations, businesses, and educational institutions, fostering collaboration and driving initiatives aimed at promoting the water industry and building community trust. Whereas the water system's significant contributions have had a profound and lasting impact on the health, well-being, and public safety and prosperity of our community, ensuring a sustainable water supply for current and future generations. Whereas on this historic occasion, we recognize and celebrate the City of Grand Rapids Water System's 150 years of dedicated service, their unwavering commitment and outstanding achievements in the field of water management. Now therefore, I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of our great city of Grand Rapids, do hereby celebrate and recognize this day, July 25th, 2023, the 150th anniversary of our water system's establishment. I urge all of our residents to join me in expressing our sincere appreciation for our water system's contribution to our community and to reflect upon the importance of reliable access to clean water and the preservation of our water resources, not just for today, but for generations to come. Thank you. say a few words?
Hang on,
Go
hang
ahead.
I need to raise this up a little bit. So a lot of people don't know the history behind drinking water in Grand Rapids. It actually started in 1848 with a private company. It was called the Grand Rapids Hydraulic Company. And they used wooden pipes, they used springs and streams to divert water that was used for firefighting purposes as well as showering, bathing, and so forth. However, in 1873, the city started to pursue a waterworks department. And that was driven basically out of the process that the hydraulic company, which was a private for-profit company with investors from Boston, was struggling to keep up with the demands of a growing city in terms of both firefighting as well as water quality. And it was on July 20th of 1873 that the citizens in Grand Rapids, 96% of those that voted in favor of establishing a waterworks department. So between the citizens as well as the leadership then and now, we're very appreciative of the collaboration and the partnership that we've had in this community. And as our system grows, we continue to grow. We continue to develop our services as well. So what we do in water is we do something called the challenge coin. And these challenge coins all have the city's core values on the back, and we make sure that we hand these out to staff that truly embody these core values in their operations, their daily work, and how they work with each other as well as the community. So we have some that we're going to hand out to our leadership today as part of our collaborative efforts with you in the community and in leadership. And it's a special one. It's got a special 150 designation on it. So please, when you take these with you, make sure that you tell the story about Grand Rapids Water and the partnership that we have in the community as well. So thank you.
All right, everyone come on up here. We'll get a picture.
Thank you so much.
What's this word? Thank you. To make people cry. I love it. Who knew water? This was this emotional. As a former firefighter.
Hydrant painter.
Man full of a lot of lots of just living your best life. He goes on vacation. Yeah, you gotta remember, they can't see us. No, you all stay there. I think we. I shine bright. I don't need a stool.
Same what I have for my daughter.
It's like, oh my gosh. Well, now I might need to go up there too.
Oh, you do want us to come down?
Listen.
Come on in. Here we go. Turn to the side.
Joe. Everybody's smiling, right? Say water.
Thank you.
Next year. Remember this tonight when we are in hour 5 of our comments.
Thank you again, and congratulations to Chuck. I know many of us have worked with Chuck over the years, and we miss him. We'll miss him, but we wish him well on retirement. And with that, one final recognition. I'll turn this over to our city manager to recognize another city employee who is embarking on a new chapter of life as she enters retirement.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ask if the water employees can stay for one more recognition before everyone leaves.
If you were leaving.
While they're here, as we're recognizing fellow employees, and it's appropriate because this employee has been supportive of every city department throughout her career. And I am speaking of Ms. Desiree Fruget, who is our Human Resources Director and will be retiring at the end of this month. And she has had almost a 20-year career serving the citizens of Grand Rapids, and she has started as an analyst and has served as a labor relations manager as well as assistant director and director, and she has really been dedicated to helping our employees. Firsthand, I've seen her work during the most difficult times in the workforce, during the pandemic, where we, unlike many other employers, could not afford to have the majority of our workforce telecommute. But Ms. Fruget and her team found a way to continue the city services in a way that didn't disrupt the quality of life of our employees and be supportive to our workforce. She has helped us through numerous of labor agreements with our employee associations to make sure that we were able to recruit and retain the best employees, and has helped me on some very important executive appointments throughout my tenure. I think I was counting today at least 12 of them, ranging from both of our public safety directors who are here now, our police chief, fire chief, planning director, economic development director. She has helped us with finding a communications director, as well as our IT director and several other key positions. And so has been a very, very important part of our organization. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you for your work and wish you the best in retirement. You certainly have earned it, and would like for this dais as well as the employees here to also show our appreciation for your leadership.
All right, thank you, City Manager, and our best to you, Desiree, and thanks for your service over the years. I hope you get out there and get a whole lot more time on the golf course. All right, Commissioners, with that, we have two, as I said, just two briefings and updates on ongoing efforts, and one of them is related to our work on public health and safety. The other one is related to recent legislative updates, budget decisions, and an update on some city projects that have been funded and timeline related to those projects. So we'll start with the first one. This is a staff update on efforts to improve public health and safety related to the ordinance specifically that are on our agenda tonight to consider. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Deputy City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Commission. So we are here just briefly to talk about the follow-up from the public hearings that you held on both of these two proposed ordinances at your last Commission meeting, setting the stage for action on your agenda tonight. So that just wanted to go over a couple changes we made at the staff level as a result of the feedback we received, as well as provide some more information and transparency for the Commission in terms of implementation and communications around these changes. So just to put this in context, I think it is important to note that there are a number of city efforts and investments underway around issues relating to some of the topics that are covered by the ordinances for action tonight. So the City Commission and city staff have been dedicating quite a lot of resources, both in terms of funds and staff time, on responding to the need for affordable housing, homelessness response, and housing stability, as well as public health issues. So some of those highlights are captured on the slide. I do want to call out at your last meeting in June, the Commission approved a contract with Community Rebuilders for additional rapid rehousing funds of $500,000. We are seeing community partners contribute to that as well, with the DDA committing $1.5 million to that contract as well.
$150,000.
$150,000, sorry. sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was already moving on to that's in addition to your adopted budget for fiscal year '24, which has more than $9 million of support for affordable housing, homelessness response, and stability services. Go
Deputy
ahead.
City Manager, I'll just add those, so for the full commission to be aware of. The county also approved funds for community builders to support this effort, and then we are actively talking to individuals in the private sector and some foundations about also contributing. But as of right now, both the county has contributed $340,000 and the DDA obviously with $150,000. So it's almost at the $1 million mark, and our goal is to get to $1.5 million for this first 12-month period. So I just want to say thank you to our partners and for others who are helping us fund this effort.
Absolutely, and the work of community rebuilders is already underway. So the commission has also earmarked $10 million for the Affordable Housing Fund from the future sale of 201 Market. There's also a number of other efforts highlighted on the slide. We do continue our street outreach through HOT and our homeless outreach coordinator, and we are working with a number of other community partners who have street outreach to align around a housing first approach. We have worked with Crossroads Bible Church to really get to a housing readiness set of services at their Fusion Center, which occurs once a week. And we're monitoring how that is helping accelerate the timeline for folks once a unit or housing resources identified to be documenting their eligibility and able to move in. So we're tracking whether we're able to accelerate that timeline at all, and we'll be reporting out on that in the future. You approved in your fiscal year '24 budget as well a Clean Communities program, which is going to allow us to sustain the level of cleaning service that we've been able to do this spring and summer around the downtown, under some of the freeway overpasses, and our parks and parking ramps as well. We continue to coordinate our 311 services, so when we do educate the public about I'm seeing a situation of a public health concern, cleanliness concern, we let people know to call 311, and then at the back end, we'll coordinate whether it's private property or ambassador sort of cleaned property or our own city staff. We'll coordinate on the back end a response to that. And we continue to invest in private security where needed, and work very closely with GRPD on public safety issues. So I want to highlight the the changes that staff recommends and are included in your ordinances for action tonight that were a result of the feedback we received at the public hearing. So first, with respect to the nuisance code itself, which deals with the personal property, it defines property, defines excess property, and then has the protocols that we will follow with respect to potentially impounding personal property that's left in public ways. There was concern that a person trying to get that property back, redeeming, the legal term is redeeming that property from us once it's impounded, would be charged a fee, which would just be exacerbating some issues of affordability. We have added to the statute clear statement that fees are not going to be charged if someone redeems that property. Also, with respect to the disorderly conduct code, you heard quite a bit of feedback about the concern of how the loitering definition would be applied in places, for example, public parks. It was never the intent of the ordinance to be so broadly applied. So what the ordinance was intending to do was first define the conduct of loitering, and then it prohibited it in very discrete and well-defined circumstances. The definition we thought could benefit from a little bit of cleanup to reflect that intent. So we eliminated some of the more confusing language about public spaces and instead defined the conduct, but then said, referred directly to the two places where that conduct is prohibited. So loitering, as it's defined, is not prohibited generally. It's only prohibited there at the bottom of the page in subsections C and D. So that's where you're in a public building or other premises and you've been asked to leave already by the owner or representative of the owner. And then loitering in a doorway where the effectiveness of that doorway, the ability to pass through or function the doorway, is interfered with by that behavior. So generally speaking, someone outdoors in a park, enjoying the park, that's not prohibited conduct. Then with respect to implementation, so should the commission adopt these ordinances this evening, they generally have a 30-day effective period. We will be using that time to update some of our policies and procedures. So with respect to disorderly conduct, as GRPD often does if there are changes to statutes that they enforce, they will coordinate with the city attorney's office, some training for all of their officers, and they will roll that out on a variety of platforms to ensure that officers are aware of those changes. And the general intent, I think the chief has already spoken to, that we see with a lot of these sort of conduct statutes is to get to voluntary compliance. So that is part of the training, to approach people, inform them of what conduct is okay and not okay, and seek voluntary compliance, which is a very effective method. With respect to the nuisance provisions, those provisions are being enforced by the staff that are otherwise responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the public property at issue. So park staff, our public works staff, our mobile GR staff for parking ramps. We have an internal implementation team that represents a whole host of the boots on the ground staff that are in some way responsible for or helping us with the effectiveness of those ordinances, and they are helping us to update some existing standard operating procedures, SOPs, that we already have in place. So as we've talked about over time, we have been doing this daily cleaning. We have been working with HOT. We have been working with our external partners to help inform people about what is okay with respect to personal property. The ordinances that are in front of you later this evening clarify that, so makes the rules very clear. How much property is allowed, what's considered personal property, what's considered excess personal property, where can it be that doesn't create a safety or health issue, and where can it not be. So those rules are now much more clear. We'll be updating our SOPs and educating all of our staff and partners about those changes. Similarly, with respect to the disorderly conduct, our goal here is voluntary compliance. We have found a lot of success in that strategy already over this past several months. When people know what the rules are, they really do appreciate knowing that will be acceptable, and try very hard to stay within those rules. We will also continue to let folks know of the resources that are available for storage of personal property. We continue to partner with Mel Trotter to make those facilities available, and we'll include that as part of our education. There were also questions asked about unique circumstances. So if we were to have to impound some personal property, what happens if somewhere the person who owns that property is prohibited or unable to get back to it within 30 days. We already have in place a protocol where we notify HOT a week before the 30-day timeline. If they are aware of someone, they can remind them, hey, your property is here. If you want to go get it, this is how you do it. But they can also let us know if they know that person is incapacitated for some reason. So they're in medical treatment of some sort, they're in crisis and not able to get that property, and then we can deal with that accordingly. So we will update those protocols, but we already have some of that in place. We'll also be developing the notice language. So Mr. Strom described a lot of the sort of legal due diligence that went into the ordinance in front of you, and a lot of that has to do with laws about notice, notification to people before or after property is taken, where they can get that property back. So we'll be working on making sure we have both physical notices to give people, but also notices that we may post in certain areas. And then we will be communicating with all of our partners and the public. So that gets us to the final slide, the communication plan. So we already have some public information out there about codes and ordinances and who to call. So we'll be updating that. We will be engaging with potentially impacted individuals, whether through some of our outreach service providers, but also our parks users and special event organizers. Some of those policies or uses of those properties are going to have to tighten up a little bit with respect to how long property stays in some of our facilities, so we'll be working on that. And we'll be informing organized stakeholder groups, making ourselves available to come to meetings, talk about what the changes are, what we expect, how people can help, how people can play a role in ensuring that everybody knows what the rules and expectations are, and that we can all function in these public areas respectfully. So that's all that I have for you on the changes that are in your packet for this evening.
Thank you. So first, thanks for your work on this. I really appreciate the city staff and the city attorney's office going back and looking at where we needed to provide some clarity and clarifying language based on concerns that we heard. So thank you for that. I do, as I've said before, I think this is a really balanced approach that is narrowly focused to address the concerns that we continue to hear. And obviously, it's coupled with our ongoing efforts to improve a system that we know needs to have better outcomes for individuals experiencing homelessness. So thank you for that. I'll open it up, see if there's questions or comments. Commissioners, any questions or comments? I'll start with City Commissioner Isasi.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Behrens, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. One, I too think, none of us here created the dynamics, neither did the individuals who are experiencing homelessness generally, although in these ordinances, again, we're talking about very narrow definition of behavior, and I think that is, Mr. Schramm, presented that in a very detailed way at our last meeting. I really encourage people to take a look at that. But I get it, because sometimes we only hear the headlines of what is occurring. So I just wanted to continue to point that out. I too have full faith in the internal operations of the city to evaluate, to review. But I will say, after the implementation plan, I'd love to see what's our evaluation plan to make sure, are there any unintended consequences? As, I think probably all of us have, we have that question when we put something like this forth. My questions are really around some of the training of different departments, as sort of this work expands, and we really, again, don't believe that this ordinance and this implementation is not just solely a police department issue or a fire department issue, but obviously talking about public works and parks. It would be good to know what are some of the different training and awareness building. I know that probably our police department and fire department have had more of that as it relates to individuals who are dealing with a medical emergency. A few weeks ago, I had a call. I called the hot team. I was outside of a store on Division. The person who answered was very helpful. Somebody was having what maybe seemed to be behavior that was not typical that you would see outside of a store. And upon further discussion with somebody else, the person was in a diabetic shock. And so, I think sometimes my initial reaction was like, I'll be honest, I was scared. I was like, should I go in there? What should I do? And I think we probably all have that. We have implicit bias. And so how do we make sure that our departments all have that training appropriately to understand how to engage and connect? So this is a really long question. Yeah, that's what your face is telling me. But the comment is, outside of the departments who might have most recently been working on these issues, how do we make sure that those other departments get the appropriate training and understanding and awareness building? So that's a comment, or if you have something to share on that.
Sure. Just briefly, it's a big question. So that kind of training is important, I think, from our equity office and, in so many different ways that we provide services to the community, specifically with respect to sort of some of the things we're talking about implementing here. We are very closely partnering with HOT. So the initial sort of bridge strategy is to not get everybody to the level of training that HOT already has, right? So HOT, or our mobile crisis response team, are sort of the first call and actually the first kind of walkthrough team that is building awareness of these rules, and then sort of the public works and maintenance staff come along after that. We have already started asking, though, because we have several months now worth of experience, what do staff need to feel supported in this work, as it will be an ongoing portion of the work. So we're starting to get that feedback so we can start to supplement what we're doing, and we'll continue to do that.
I talked about the evaluation plan. I think an Inform, I'll just, have to I know we have corridor improvement authorities. I would also include our neighborhood associations on there. I think it's important to list them. And then my last thing is, we've been talking about this. I think the first comments we probably got around sort of seeing that there were different challenges related to overall safety, to overall cleanliness, to overall mental health supports, right? This big umbrella of issues, even though we're talking about something very narrow, was probably in early 2020 as the pandemic sort of began to exist and the norms, there were just a lot of norms that weren't there. So we've been talking about this for quite a bit of time. And I think in some ways it's good to be at this point. But I also think while it's going to be record-breaking hot across this country and we deal with those challenges, some of the comments, I think, go into what will it be like in the winter? Like, some different shelter providers have noted that they have had an increase in individuals into their locations. Obviously, these investments should help in some way, but it's always hard to know, like, if, what's going to tip the scales. And so I'd love to be able to talk in a future meeting, not necessarily today, about how do we then now start to begin to prepare for the winter months? Because I think that can come up very quickly, and there's different dynamics that play out than it does in the summer too. So, and again, more on the broader conversation of those experiencing homelessness versus what we're talking about today and what we're going to be voting on tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I appreciate you bringing that up. And as I said, there's a lot of work happening in this space, and I think one of the things that is really critical is the work that we're doing with a number of partners around system mapping. I continue to say that we don't have a good shared metric system where we're able to really look at daily, weekly, monthly data on, where the utilization is, what is needed, and then also where the gaps are in the community. So there's a lot of work happening on that front as well. I really appreciate Ryan Kilpatrick's work on that, and then some of our other partners really looking at that data component. I think the CHC 2.0, the Community Housing Connect data system that hopefully will be online by the end of the year will provide us with some really good data to track. And then we need to look at how we improve, coordinated entry, outreach, alignment. So there's some system work that I think has to happen in order for us to have really good data to base decisions on as well. So, yeah. All right, other questions or comments, commissioners? Commissioner Perdue?
Good morning. Thank you so much for the updates and the thoughtful response and integration of some of the feedback that we've received. As I prepared for today's conversation, I also went back and looked at my notes from public comment, letters that were being sent in or letters that were published online, and cross-checked that with the language, and it became even clearer to me how thoughtful and intentional it was, and how it really, the proposed language really already speaks to a lot of the concerns that we hear. So I just want to reiterate my thanks, and especially going line by line again, just really, really appreciate all the work that you all put in. In terms of a few follow-up kind of last questions, related to some of the changes or some of the conversations in the past, really want to double down on the wanting to see or would like to see an evaluation plan, and hopefully, maybe 6 months into implementation, coming back to this body to give an update on how it's going. What are those intended consequences, unintended consequences? What are we learning? How are we pivoting in terms of implementation? Is that something that's possible, 6 months kind of coming back if this passes this evening? Okay, I'm seeing ahead now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So great. So I think that's really important for our accountability as well as public accountability. Also, really appreciate Commissioner Ysassi's questions around training. That was something that was really top of my mind. The way that this policy is written, it is not a racialized policy, but this issue is a very racialized issue with extreme racial disparities in who, kind of particularly for our houseless population, who encompasses that. And so the role of bias, the role of de-escalation, the role of understanding mental health challenges or medical challenges that might come up when interfering or interfacing with these individuals is really important. So really appreciate you sharing back the thoughtfulness of utilizing staff members who have that top tier level training first and foremost, and then coming up with a plan of getting everyone else where they need to be before interacting with some of our high needs population. So just want to recognize that and double down on that need. I heard you say a few times that voluntary compliance is the goal. And you said that there's been a lot of success the past few months with voluntary compliance, particularly around property. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and and talk a little bit as well about where folks are not compliant, and is that still an issue? Or are we getting 100% of folks on a volunteer and complying once they're educated about some of, what's allowed and what's not allowed?
Sure. So one of the driving factors for these revisions in front of you is simply that it hasn't been very clear what the code says about how much personal property you can have in the rights of way in parks. There are some guidelines, and we use those to sort of come to kind of a layperson understanding, and started communicating that in the spring to people. And we heard from a lot of people that have a lot of goods with them in the right of way. They're staying unhoused or for whatever reason, appreciation. Oh, now I understand. I know people have been frustrated, and now I understand what it is I'm expected to do, and I'll do my best to do that. Some challenges with where to store my things, which we inform people about Mel Trotter and are continuing to work through that. But I think not 100% voluntary compliance, but certainly a lot of good intent from the population that we are working with to do that and to meet everybody's expectations. And that works the other way as well. We educate business owners and people downtown that, some of the circumstances that they're seeing that they call us about are not problematic. That's what we allow. So it is a two-way sort of street and education and understanding building. So these ordinances will make that much more clear. So now we have the 32-gallon standard. That's much easier to quantify and explain and help people visualize, which will be part of what we do moving forward. If we end up with somebody who is non-compliant, that's where we kind of will lean on HOT. For example, if the first contact is by a park staff person and they're getting some pushback, they'll call HOT. And sometimes those relationships are what we lean into, and that ends up getting us where we want to go. Sometimes folks just need a little extra time, and we're trying for voluntary compliance, so we'll give them a little extra time, or they need somebody to come back from an errand they were running to help them manage their own property. We'll do that as well. Sometimes GRPD, the HOT GRPD person assigned to HOT comes in. That's kind of a little next step of escalation. And sometimes folks just leave things behind, and then we end up picking it up. So that's kind of how that would look.
Thank you. And I've heard a lot of folks say that we are limiting, that this ordinance would limit how much people own. And the way I read it, I think it's very clear that it doesn't limit how much people own, but how much they can store in public spaces like streets and parks. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I think that's an important clarity point for the public to understand.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And we'll continue to talk about the storage program at Mel Trotters. That is also limited space. So, certainly, again, with unique circumstances, we will work with outreach and other service providers if someone needs some different long-term solution for significant property. Again, trying to figure out how to support folks that are in circumstances that we are all empathetic to and trying to address.
Appreciate that commitment. And then last one, around timeline. So I noticed that there isn't, or are you looking, when it comes to implementation, are you looking at setting a timeline between pre-notice, potential removal, and post-notice?
Yes, those are outlined. The pre-notice timelines are outlined in the statute. Or the ordinance, what we're working on is, will some of that be accomplished by signage versus others that will have to be given in a unique circumstances directly to an individual and then the time elapse.
I think one fair criticism that I've heard from the public around this is if the time between a pre-notice and potential removal is 4 hours, is that fair, right? Versus 24 hours or 48 hours. So I'm curious, is that something that will be finalized in the implementation plan? Is that something that should be included here? How do we make sure that there is protection around kind of that notice process?
I'm calling up Mr. Strom to help back me up on that one.
Good morning.
I so far back.
Thank you. I was getting, Ms. Behrens was doing such a great job. I felt pretty safe back there. So it's contemplated that we might develop those more thoroughly through the implementation plan. We looked at what other cities were doing, and it really is a wide variety from an hour to 4 hours to 8 hours to 24 hours. And so I think that in implementation, we're going to be able to develop those more often on a situational basis and try to set some guide rails and best practices. But to find a hard and fast number to include in the ordinance felt irresponsible because there was a lack of consistency nationwide on it, so.
Makes sense. Thank you. Again, want to echo my thanks and thoughtfulness and appreciate all of your taking into consideration our conversations, public feedback to kind of come up with a final draft that we'll vote on tonight. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Commissioners, any final questions or comments? Commissioner?
Yeah, I just want to triple down on what my other two colleagues said. Those are things that have been floating through my mind as well. And I did have one question under the implementation plan. I'm not understanding what including acceptable confirmation identity. What does that mean exactly?
I probably should have said identification, but Mr. Strawman highlighted this as well. So some older ordinances require government ID to establish proof of identity before you, say, get your car out of impound. That is obviously challenging for some folks. They don't have access to that or don't have that form of identification. So we're going to, we do not require that in the ordinance, but we are going to come up with some acknowledging that those kinds of forms of identification are difficult, some protocol to make sure that we're turning the property owner over to its rightful owner. So we'll have to have some protocols for staff to know, like, can you describe what's here? Can you maybe have HOT also verify if they know folks, or different outreach social service providers verify folks' identity, but we'll be working on that.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other final thoughts or questions? Commissioner O'Connor, anything to add? No? Okay. So again, Commissioners, obviously this is on our agenda tonight, so we'll revisit it and then we'll vote tonight. So that will take us to our next briefing. This is a briefing on recent legislation and state budget decisions, as well as some updates on some of our priorities here at the city related to some of the funds that recently were allocated through the state budget process. So I'll turn this over to Ms. Karen Farrick, and I don't know if Mr. Canfield is going to join as well. So go ahead.
I'll start, Mayor.
Okay.
So, and there'll be several presenters joining Ms. Farrick. Mr. Matthews and Ms. Behrens will also be part of the discussion. But I wanted to begin today with an opportunity to really appreciate all the work that has been done by our legislators in terms of both policy and funding. And then from a operational perspective, many of you have asked, how does that impact our operation plan and budget? Since we recently adopted a funding plan that didn't include those resources, how we would be able to implement or accelerate some of the things that we had in our 5-year capital plan and bring them forth sooner. So the staff will come forth today presenting preliminary plans for development, particularly where there are facilities to be constructed. Having said that, we're still in the process, much like the school district has done over the past couple of years, going over our comprehensive facility master plan. This funding helps to accelerate a few projects, but there's still a lot of other things that we need to look at comprehensively. And so we'll try to outline how we have both a short-term and midterm view of our facility needs and balance those. And then the last is I've gotten a couple calls, both from current commissioners as well as people outside of City Hall asking how we would take position on legislative issues. And so I wanted to reframe for the public and for the dais what our legislative process is, and make everyone aware of what the current legislative agenda that has already been voted on, and identify the opportunity to amend that in the future as we discuss our future priorities. So with that, I do want to recognize, again, Ms. Farrick for her work as our person who leads us in our legislative work and governmental affairs, and I know she's been working very hard over the past year, and there's a lot of good news to be celebrated today. So I want to thank her and all of you who've been part of that as well. So, Ms. Farrick.
Thank you, City Manager, and good morning to the Commission and Mayor. As you know, I am Karen Farrick, and I am the Government and Legislative Affairs Officer for the city. And so what my office is, primarily focused on is being that legislative liaison and lobbyist for the city and managing all of our city legislative priorities for both state and federal government. Sorry, I'm not,
Going the wrong way.
other way, this way. There we go, sorry.
Next slide. There you go.
There we go. So for both the state and federal government, which includes creating, eliminating, and modifying legislation consistent with the city's strategic plan. Also, as the city manager mentioned, facilitating the adoption of a legislative priority agenda by the full city commission. My office collaborates with stakeholders, legislators, and many partners to find common goals and advocate on behalf of the city for statutory changes that are consistent with the city's strategic plan. I also manage and oversee the city's lobbyist contracts at the state and federal level. Primarily, my work is with the City of Grand Rapids legislative team, and that team includes the mayor, Commissioner O'Connor, Commissioner Moody, the city manager, and then my office. We make recommendations for the legislative priority agenda and provide input on advocating for legislative policy and funding priorities on behalf of the city. We also act as the liaison between the city and state and federal government and elected officials and their staff. And I provide regular legislative policy and regulatory updates on legislative and funding items to the city manager and the legislative team, and coordinate staff testimony before legislative committees and staff participation on key commissions and task forces. I want to celebrate some of the recent policy achievements that have been signed into law, starting with the land bank legislation. Public Act 52 of 2023 will allow the city to establish its own land bank. This bill did not receive immediate effect, so it will take effect 90 days after the legislature adjourns sine die, which will be near the end of March in 2024. We also were able to see some brownfield tax increment financing amendments, which will expand the definition of eligible activity in the Brownfield Act to include housing development activities, which will help us with satisfying some of our housing needs in the city. These new laws are Public Acts 90 through 93 of 2023, and they did receive immediate effect and became effective on July 18th. Also, additional amendments in the Brownfield Act to the Transformational Brownfield Program, which will expand and remove caps and allow additional projects through this incentive program. This was also signed into law became effective on July 18th as Public Act 89 of 2023. And finally, we had the conversion therapy ban bills, which passed the legislature and are expected to be signed into law by the governor. This will provide that a mental health professional who attempts to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity faces probation, license suspension, or fine. And then the implementation of Prop 2-2022, which is now Public Acts 81 through 88 of 2023. And this expands access to voting, including at least 9 days of early voting before each statewide and federal election, permanent absentee voting in all elections, and requiring every municipality to have at least one drop box per 15,000 registered voters. Moving on to our priority funding achievements for fiscal year 2024, $41 million will be coming directly to the city, $35 million for new and replacement fire stations in the 3rd Ward, and to support the construction of a fire training center, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about the plans for that in some of the next presenters. And then $6 million for the MLK Park Lodge Improvement Project. So again, that's in the 3rd Ward, and you'll be hearing more about that shortly. I also wanted to just highlight that there is in addition to the 41 million, there's over 50 million coming into the city for partner projects, and I'll just touch on a few of those. We have just over $1 million that will be coming to the historic Sullivan Field, Valley Field project, $1 million for the Grand Rapids Public Museum, $14 million for John Ball Zoo, $5 million for the Grand Rapids Children's Museum, and $1.5 million for Blandford Nature Center. So again, you can see the list. There's quite a few projects that are going to be funded. But it is important to note that all of these investments are included in House Bill 4437, which is the appropriations bill that provides appropriations for multiple state departments and branches for fiscal year 2023-2024. And that begins on October 1st of this year and runs until September 30th, 2024. The legislation has not yet been signed into law by the governor, and then once signed, it'll be available after October 1st.
Mayor, if I could, before Ms. Behrens comes, if I forgot to mention, if we could get through all the materials, because I know there's a lot of interesting things in each ward, and we probably could park on any one, talk through, but if we can get through the materials and come back and ask questions, that'd be preferable.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy City Manager Kate Behrens.
Thanks, Karen. All right, so once the wonderful work of the legislative team is completed and we see these kinds of things happening with implications at the local level, we wanted to share sort of how we transition that within the departments and get ready to take advantage of those things. So first, with respect to some of the capital investments, significant dollars, as Karen highlighted, for our fire department, $35 million awarded by the state. Those will be earmarked for 2 fire stations, the Kalamazoo-Kendall Fire Station and Division Avenue Fire Station. We anticipate those to be fully funded with that state award, and then remaining dollars would go to a new fire training center. We don't expect that the fire training center will be able to be fully funded by the remainder, but gets us a long way down the road with that significant facility. Those projects are all, you'll see there on the screen, we have some estimated costs. We've provided that in a range. Because the new stations are not designed yet, that is the next step. So the fire department and engineering department will be hiring consultants to set scope, sequencing, and estimated budgets, and then going into the architecture and design phase to solidify the scope, schedule, and budget. So that work will be happening this fiscal year. We are hopeful that that will lead us to some significant construction in fiscal years 25, with opening in fiscal year 26 for many of those facilities. With respect to some of the parks earmarks, we wanted to highlight 2 of the significant projects. So MLK Park, you see the rendering there on the screen, really a significant change for that park and that for the community there. So you'll see the comparison between what the current MLK Park Lodge provides with respect to community facilities and assets versus what would be proposed with the new 25,000 square foot facility. And we're really moving into a year-round community center type facility there. Really excited with the significant state investment that we're able to get that project started now. So with funds that we had already budgeted, we have the adequate funds on hand to pursue that project and anticipate starting demolition later this year after the close of the pool season. It is obviously a substantial project, so it will take us through a couple seasons to get that completed, but really exciting. Sullivan Field, Valley Field is another one we're highlighting here because of the significant state award that project is able to get underway. That's a public-private partnership, if you will. So there is the Fans of Valley Field organization that has committed to some substantial fundraising, and the state award actually was a direct appropriation to the fans. That money will supplement money that the commission has already approved out of a variety of sources, and we expect phase 1, the improvements to the grandstand, to begin later this fall. And then that will roll through as the private fundraising continues to generate what's needed to complete phase 2, with project completion hopefully in the summer of 2026. While not part of the most recent set of legislative earmarks, we did want to take this opportunity also to update the commission about the Grand River Greenway. So if you remember, that was about a year ago or so that the state committed $55 million to DGRI as as an award through their ARPA, the state ARPA dollars, to complete Grand River Greenway through Kent County. So DGRI has led a number of groups to provide input to their board with respect to how to allocate those $55 million. On the screen here is what has been earmarked for City of Grand Rapids projects. They really prioritized building missing links in the overall trail. The recommendations for allocations total $45 million, so they're holding back a little just to see, make sure there's enough to get those projects across the finish line, and also in the timelines that are required with respect to ARPA. As you well know, those have some pretty tight timelines. The funds need to be obligated by the end of 2024 with them spent by the end of 2026. We do expect to bring forward a sub-recipient grant agreement between DGRI and the city in the next meeting or two as we work through the details. DGRI has now gotten their grant agreement with DNR, so that unlocks the ability to do these sub-grant agreements. And then we will be very aggressively project managing those to meet the timelines that are established. Turning now to what we do when the legislature unlocks some additional policy options at the local level, focusing in on the land bank and TIF legislation that recently adopted that Karin highlighted. Again, the land bank legislation would allow Grand Rapids to begin its own local land bank if the county doesn't already operate one. As Ms. Farrick highlighted, that legislation is not effective until early next year, but we will start beginning the policy conversations with the Brownfields Authority and the Commission to set the stage for how we leverage that opportunity. Brownfield TIF also expanded the eligible activities definition, so that while that doesn't increase the amount of money, didn't add new tax revenues to the pie, it does increase the number of projects that may be eligible to use that increment to achieve, again, some of our affordable housing goals. And that became effective already. I do want to highlight that that legislation added a process step at the state level. So MSHDA will now be required to approve projects that take advantage of that particular type of eligible activity. So that will impact some of our timelines, and I'll go into that in the next slide. Also wanted to touch on the transformational brownfields amendment. That's exciting for Grand Rapids. We are hoping that there will be additional projects now that there is more capacity there that will truly unlock some of the vision pieces that we have in place for transforming Grand Rapids. So local adoption of those things, we'll begin that work with a briefing at the Brownfields Redevelopment Authority and at the Economic Development Project Team at meetings in August. With respect to the local Brownfield Authority in particular, because MSHDA now has an approval step, they will be putting forward their own guidelines. So that program isn't going to be immediately available for projects to start getting a local approval. We do expect MSHDA, we haven't heard a specific timeline that they're committing to, but we do expect them to do a somewhat traditional rulemaking process where they come out with draft, there's public comment, they revise it. So we'll be monitoring that situation, but we'll be starting the local conversation so we are ready to hit the ground running when that authority is unlocked. And local land bank, as we talked about, is not able to be instituted until the spring of next year, but again, we'll continue and begin those conversations in August and continue them as directed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Doug Matthews to talk about a couple other city initiatives.
Thank you, Ms. Behrens. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about with you is the facilities master plan. I know it's been a part of conversations, it's been referenced a number of times, but we haven't kind of laid out exactly what it is that we're doing, why it is that we're doing it, and how it aligns to some of the bigger conversations, especially when it comes to the disposition of property. One of the things I do want to note, with the facilities master plan, really the basis is we want to start to forecast what it is that we need as an organization so that can be part of the conversations that we have in the future when it comes to comes to our facilities. And we see some of that playing out presently with 201 Market and Scribner, where we're doing the facilities needs as we're planning a move to the new site, and that's one of those things that we'd like to avoid in the future. So the scope of the project, it's an assessment of the current condition of key properties that the city owns, as well as functional space needs. When I say space needs, that's both space needs for staff, but it's also space needs for service delivery. How do our service centers need to be configured? Where should they be located? Things like that, so that we can best provide service to the public. Also, forecast of our maintenance and repair costs for major assets. And then recommendations for disposition, reuse, or consolidation based on our needs and based on the market. It's important to note that this evaluation is focused almost exclusively on occupied city-owned structures. So those areas where we have people, or the structures that are supporting those structures where we have people, so that we can plan those effectively. So it doesn't cover things like parkland, lift stations, things like that. We've got 60 buildings or supportive structures on that list that are being evaluated, and those are being evaluated at 3 different levels, level 1, 2, and 3. 1 being just a walkthrough and a condition evaluation of the facility, down to the 3rd level, or I should say up to the 3rd level, which is really a full analysis of the building, the life cycle, the occupancy, and the need. One of the things I do want to note is that this is not an evaluation of specific properties for private redevelopment, but it does provide us with estimates on market valuation, which is something that we can factor into our plans in the future. I think I've already mentioned some of the reasons why this is important. It allows us for longer-term planning and information that allows us to bring our own needs to the table when we're having conversations about reuse or disposition of property. So right now we're doing the condition assessment, the space needs analysis, and the market analysis. Those will be done in November. The financial analysis and the actual master plan development should be complete by May or June of 2024. What we've been doing during these phases presently, when we talk about the space needs specifically, is surveying all employees. You all as employees probably got an invitation to participate in that survey. We're also going to set up some one-on-one opportunities for each of you to have conversations with the consultants. So if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, you'll have an opportunity to share those. And then developing a means as we start to refine what it is that we have for the public to provide us with some feedback as well. So these are some of the properties of particular note, kind of piggybacking on some of the things that Ms. Barron said. This is really focused on what's on or adjacent to the river as we talk about that revitalization project. 201, of course, is a project that's in flight. 509 Wealthy, there is an opportunity to extend redevelopment of the corridor to include 509 Wealthy, but here's some of the things that we really want to get a clear picture of. 509 Wealthy is the nerve center for our fiber optic infrastructure as well as our lighting control systems. So we want to make sure that we have full awareness of what it would take both financially and operationally to relocate that if that property were to be made available for redevelopment. 457 Market is a small triangular property that's been contemplated as an access point for the Greenway or potential housing. 555 Monroe has some restrictive state grant dollars that are associated with it, and it's planned as part of the Canal Park in the Parks Master Plan and the River for All Plan. And that, for those that might be watching or listening and not familiar, 555 is the large, primarily concrete lot that's adjacent to the Consumers Energy Transformer right there on North Monroe. Just as a point of reference, it's just, what would that be, just south of that. 1120 Monroe is right across the street from Coldbrook. That's the current site for our development services operations and our planning operations, as well as building inspection. That's one that really does require the completion of the facility study to get an idea of what our staffing and operational needs might be for public phasing services. It's also, and I'm going to reference this when we talk about Colebrook, there is a, pardon me, there is a 10-foot drain commission culvert that runs directly underneath the parking lot at 1120 Monroe, and then takes a diagonal turn and runs directly underneath the main pump building at Coldbrook. And those are some of the things that, again, we want to make sure that we've thought through as we move forward. So Coldbrook, of course, is contingent on the construction of the fire training facility. We don't have an option for relocating their training operations at this point. Both the Parks Master Plan and the River for All Plan have different visions for that property. Both, though, are oriented around some river-oriented recreation activity, as well as mixed use. The GR Forward Plan envisions specifically river edge enhancements and reimagining of the site for mixed use. It's important to note that any revenue from the sale of the Coldbrook facility, unlike 201 Market, we don't have the same flexibility with the money that comes in because that money is going back to the water utility as the owner of the facility. And then we need to determine, in addition to that drain commission culvert, which may or may not be a challenge, we need to determine any potential costs associated with relocating our interconnection to Consumers Energy, which also takes place right there on the Coldbrook site. That's what feeds our primary circuit at this point. So that's another conversation that we want to make sure that we have. So with that.
Okay, and if someone can advance the slides for me, I'll
Yes, sir.
wrap it up real quickly. I mentioned earlier, in addition to the allocation and then potential implementation for construction development of projects, we wanted to highlight the legislative priorities and agenda. And as you can see, the last adopted agenda for 2021 highlighted our focus on fiscal relief and sustainability coming out of the pandemic. Mr. Canfield's passing out the agenda in detail for those who may have not had a chance to look at it previously. Maintaining our local options to increase housing and tools, and we've had a lot of discussion around that with the most recent work session with the Planning Commission. I would also add earlier on the fiscal relief, that includes additional local revenue for governmental entities. And one of the discussions now is, an emerging discussion is how do we create more local options from the tourism economy. The third bullet is related to our investments around public safety, having a safer community, both in increasing trust and transparency, and lastly, the river restoration project. Next slide. And I won't spend time on each of these, and the agenda then goes in detail over additional policy and investment priorities that is centered around policy and investments that promote inclusion, equity, and diversity, maintaining our local authority, our local ability as a home rule city around development and other matters, as well as collaborating with reforms with other governmental entities around issues such as lead poisoning, as well as the public health issues that would occasionally face our community, as well as climate resiliency and carbon reduction. Next slide. And you'll see some of the other continued priorities around economic development and creating more vibrancy in our communities as well as neighborhoods, making sure that we're able to continue to recruit and attract and develop a talented workforce, as well as looking at infrastructure and technology, specifically broadband, as we try to expand our tech brand as a community. And so preliminarily, there are some things that we, in addition to whatever priorities this body would like to establish moving forward or affirm moving forward, I think much of our legislation has been centered around economic recovery due to the pandemic, and so now I think we need to be much more forward-thinking around sustained economic growth. there are a few items successfully. This is what we want to do, go back and cross out things that have already been accomplished, and you see a number of them that were planned before that have already been implemented, whether it's enabling legislation around social districts or the land bank, which you just heard the briefing, voters' rights, as well as the funding for the amphitheater. And so as we move forward, lots of discussion has emerged around gun safety and reducing gun violence, and even with our partners at the Grand Rapids Public School, I believe we have received or will receive some, based on their resolution, a request to enact, have more active legislation or advocacy around the issue of gun violence, and this body has done that in the past through a couple of issues, and we're in the process of preparing a response to that, but we certainly can continue to focus on that moving forward. So just in summary, what we've heard today was, very thorough briefing, or preliminary briefing rather, on the state-funded, supported initiatives that will enable us to move our capital projects forward around fire parks and other parkway projects. You've heard the overview of the plans to begin having local land bank enabling process here in Grand Rapids, as well as the update from Facility Master Plan. And I think what we'll do at this time to pause, talk about those, or even any comments you have preliminarily around the legislative agenda that we can take back to the legislative team. Well, with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, City Manager and team, for the update. I have just a couple comments and then maybe just a question about process moving forward. So a couple items, Commissioners. First, I just want to, even though they're not in the room, I want to thank our West Michigan delegation that has partnered really closely with us to move forward some of our policy priorities, as well as obviously the funding allocations that are not just going to impact the City of Grand Rapids, but a lot of our key partners in the community and West Michigan. Really appreciate all their leadership in Lansing, and I know Chief Brown is back there smiling, very happy with the allocation for the fire departments and training facility. And, as I looked at this construction timeline and layout, it struck me that the city hasn't really been in a position to invest these kind of funds into infrastructure and assets and buildings, I think, in decades, quite frankly. And so there's a lot of opportunity before us right now, I believe, as we look to update facilities, invest in our assets, but also think about the growth of our community and making sure that we have the facilities needed to support the growth and the businesses and the residents who call Grand Rapids home. And so I'm eager to see a lot of these projects move forward. I feel like we've been talking about them for years and years, quite frankly, whether it's in our parks or the MLK Lodge or our fire stations, training facility, public works facility. And so I would like to see, now that we've done the work to get us to this point, I know work is still being done on the facilities master plan. Quite frankly, I wish it would speed up. I look at those timelines. It's a little discouraging to me when I look at some of those timelines. I think, why isn't this moving a bit quicker? Because I think this is a real priority for the city, that we need to move forward on getting these designs finalized and getting shovels in the ground, which is what, quite frankly, I think a lot of our residents are ready for. They're kind of tired of us talking about things, and they want to see action. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to not just stick with these timelines, but maybe even exceed expectations on them. I also want to highlight, when it comes to a lot of these projects, whether it's Sullivan Field or some of our other projects, there's a lot of community groups actively working to raise private dollars. A lot of the work that we do in the city is really built on public-private partnerships, and there's a whole group of folks who've been working hard to raise money for that project for a long time. I know I serve on their campaign committee. Some of you are also engaged in the work, so I was grateful for the funding that we saw from the state to support that. In regards to the Greenway funds, also want to point out that, when we received the $55 million from the state, it really was looking at Kent County as a whole. And one of the recommendations is to support some of the trail connections from downtown to surrounding communities. And I believe about 19 million of the 55 million will be going to Kent County to really leverage Kent County dollars to start to connect those trails from downtown through Grand Rapids Township out to Lowell. So a lot of good work happening countywide when it comes to trail connections, in addition to the connections that we need to make here in the city of Grand Rapids. So just want to appreciate everyone who serves on that committee, as well as our partners at the county. And then my last comment, and maybe a more concrete question, is related to some of the work we need to do internally based on the legislation that's been passed. I want to make sure that we're actively engaged in that work, and that as we move forward with some of those changes, that this body is actively involved. And so I appreciate having it come back forward related to the brownfield legislation going to Economic Development Project Team. I know some of us also want to weigh in on that, as well as we look towards creation of a local land bank. I know many of us want to be engaged in that work and making sure that we're ready to go as soon as we're able. I actually think it will probably be before March of next year. And so I just want to think through what process there is for that, and we can follow up with City Manager and share our thoughts on that. So those are my comments, and I guess somewhat of a question. Yeah.
So let's start with the timeline and the acceleration of some of the projects. And I share excitement, like all of our residents and you, in getting these off the ground. But I do want to be realistic. I think similar, we ran into very ambitious timeframes for other projects, like the amphitheater and the river restoration permitting, and what has occurred is unanticipated delays, whether it's construction, design, or permitting in those. I think these hopefully will be a little bit more straightforward, since they are truly smaller facilities. The land is acquired for all of them, and there's not many other partners we are negotiating with. When I thought, and the fire chief, there he is, he just came back in the room. When we looked at the 3 projects within the fire department, we initially discussed, because there could be potential redevelopment for the training center, should we prioritize and accelerate that one before the others. And I think from a fire safety perspective, this was the recommendation from the chief, is to prioritize the responsibility of the stations in the neighborhood. And but I think to your point, there may be some room to accelerate depending on design and availability. But also with the training center, that's the reason why it's so important for us to get a consultant on board, because we could do phased relocation of that project. And so this is very preliminary. And I wanted to and that's why I put that, please bring that slide back up. Slides, no slide number on it, but the one that has a fire station construction guideline, it is preliminary with a capital P on preliminary, because we want to have at least initial feedback or discussion, see if there's anything else we should prioritize. But
this one, Mark?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah. So this is preliminary. We don't have a design consultant on board yet, and so when we are able to do that full design, all of the renderings that we've had from the stations and estimates have been conceptual until now, because they were fully funded. And so we're hoping that once we are operating from a place of more facts, because it is knowable, that if it changes either funding or timeline, will come back, and hopefully it will be both to the better. And lastly, certainly on the legislation that will help us to improve housing options and housing tools, both with Land Bank and TIF, we certainly are looking forward to getting feedback from the body in general or the subcommittees that have already are standing, but I understand that there is a sense of urgency, but some of it will be hurry and wait because there's a long runway for some of the effective date, but we are certainly open to getting feedback. Hence the reason why we wanted to have the conversation today.
Thanks. All right, Commissioners, Commissioner Isasi?
Oh, lastly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The facility master plan, I didn't address that one. And I share your sense of wanting to accelerate that one as well. And I'm really learning from our partners from GRPS. I want to make sure that we are very intentional in each step, particularly when it comes to the public engagement part. But we'll see. I think we're planning at some point, and what I've asked for is to get our third-party consulting firm to come and do a public briefing. Because what you've gotten is basically updates from staff. You voted on the item to fund the study, and at some point after we have the individual interaction, hopefully the consultant can come and give a public update to the body, and we can see what other feedback you might have that could potentially affect the outcome. We know that we don't have to wait until 2025 to do something with all 60 facilities. I just gave you an example of what could be done even with the training center and the property at Colebrook. But we don't want to do that with every property. I think Mr. Matthews made a good point. We want to have a facility plan before we have a redevelopment plan, and so we're not from moment to moment, budget to budget, figuring out how we're going to relocate facilities.
Thanks, City Manager. All right, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor and City Manager, for the updates, and Karin and half of the executive office that presented. This is obviously a lot of work. First, let me say thank you for the presentation. Admittedly, these policy pieces, we've been watching this, getting updates, whether it was in Brownfield, economic development, in these meetings. I think I said at a previous meeting, I would appreciate an update from the legislative committee prior to me going into the budget session. I would ask for that. I would also like to say that this is more of a technical thing, but on the slide that had sort of the partner projects, I think is what we're calling it, all of the different items. Great to see those numbers. Could we also get a list of monies that we have allocated to some of these specific projects? So like thinking about UMCH, I'm not saying that let me be clear, obviously not all of them have received any monies from different, again, it could be passed through federal dollars or different things that we're doing, but that would be helpful, I think, for all of us. I am definitely interested as we look at these projects, a lot of catalytic things in all of our wards. I am very interested in, staying connected in the projects. I'm sure you are, Commissioner, and the ones that are in our ward. And so appreciate the slide that talks about the 2-on-1 pieces with City Manager. I think that's going to be really important. Obviously, it's going to also be really important because next year, two of you aren't going to be here because you're term limited. So we've got, I'm thinking, my past in HR is we got to think about some succession planning on some of these things as well. So I'm going to put that out there. I don't want to think about 24, 25, but it's coming for us. I think the other thing that we had talked about in the past, maybe when we had an update from David about some of the park stuff, and then Tim gave that really great update. I've pointed people to that presentation many times about the construction and the north end. But again, we can't do everything all at once. Priorities was never meant to be a plural word. But how can we kind of coincide maybe things that we have on this list with construction pieces to reduce the amount of impact to businesses and to neighbors? So I'm thinking about Monroe right now and Canal Park, and so those are some of the pieces. Let me be clear. I know that this has been discussed, but I want to bring it back up as another important piece of maybe how we prioritize is not an obvious prioritization, but a secondary prioritization, because I do think a number of businesses and individuals are impacted when we do the things that we need to do to get to the next step that we want to be for our city. Really mine are probably more comments than anything, so let me be clear about that. And then lastly, I would say, this facilities master plan piece, gosh, I think about the work ahead. I think about moving into a small building for 10 people and the amount of change management that took. So I think there's the actual research and study that we have to do, but there's also a change management. Work is different today. So it's like I'm agreeing that, of course, I want things to be accelerated. I also think we don't have more land that needs to be created in this world. I also would love us to be able to, we have this equity framework for the river. Can we apply some of that to this framework for our facilities master plan and redevelopment? I think that's going to be really important. So this is what I don't understand sometimes, is like sometimes we do these frameworks for some things, but not other things. So I want to bring that into the conversation so that we can make the best decisions about scarce resources. And I know this from being in this seat for a couple of years, everything is costing us more. So I just caution us all, like, these are very preliminary, those obviously that we're looking at. We might need to get more money or ask for more money and figure out how to get different money. But these numbers that came, let me just also say thank you to the staff that worked so tirelessly. Also echo your comments, Mayor, about our delegation from West Michigan. This is a very exciting time. And also I think we have to be in the mindset of, like, at some point there's going to be more of us up here that aren't in this exciting time. So how do we set that up in the best way? And then I'll put my little plug in. Commissioner Perdue and I are on the West Michigan Works Board, and I know the West Michigan Works organization is, they're in city buildings, and I think there's been a question about how do we have some, like, best and greatest uses of buildings. I think we need to look at some upgrades and things like that. So I know that's been heard, but I want to say it on the record as a board member of that body, and knowing that we have workforce development and job creation as one of our top priorities, and I would support that to be continued. How do we connect in with that organization and understanding the facility needs? And I think that's the last thing I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mayor,
City
can I-
Manager, any response?
Yeah, just a point of clarification, make sure I'm clear. So on slide 9, are you asking for the city leverage funding for for only the projects that receive state funding? Is what you're asking for? Okay, just for clarification. All right, thank you.
Yeah. So off the top of my head, it's Sullivan Field, the Public Museum, United Methodist House. Yeah. All right. Commissioners, any final questions or comments? Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to support your comments around, I guess, as we continue to talk about housing in Grand Rapids being one of the, if not the most significant priority, there's certainly things that we control, there are things that we influence, and there are, ways that we can support. And these brownfield TIF and local land bank policy bills, I think are significant tools in our toolbox that we can leverage to help address, housing concerns in Grand Rapids. And so, being ready, willing, and able to help in any way I can to get those things as tools in our toolbox as soon as possible. And I'm looking forward to them, being contributing factors into more positive housing outcomes, and just prioritizing how we get those programs launched and make them accessible to as many folks as possible as soon as we can is important to me. And then hoping to weigh in on some additional legislative priorities. I think given the change in control in Lansing, I think we've seen good support from our local delegation on both sides of the aisle, but I think there's certainly some more opportunities ahead of us. One thing that I think speaks to me personally is I know there was a recent Senate bill introduced, I think it's 362, which is the a bill around solar and net metering, and just that's a huge thing. Something we've been talking about as we talk about solar in Grand Rapids and how to make it pencil out and make sense financially so that it can come to fruition and we can actually make money on it. So how do we, throw our support behind something like that to see it, either get changed to, make modifications we need, but get it across the finish line in a capacity that really helps Grand Rapids.
Yeah, thank you. And I see us having some more detailed conversations about that at our end-of-year retreat as we look to next year. And And I'm with you, we advocated for those policy changes for a long time, so now it's a matter of moving forward and really, as I said earlier, giving staff a really clear directive that we need to get moving on some of these things. And obviously, the city manager knows that as well. All right, any final questions or comments? All right, thank you, everyone. This will bring our committee of the whole to a close. Why don't we take a 2-minute break and then downstairs, room 601 for executive session. All right.